Hello everyone, Vincent from HDTV Test here. I have in my hands a copy of the new beta firmware from LG Electronics that promises to fix the high frame rate stutter issue in VRR or G-Sync mode on the LG CX or C10 OLED. And obviously this will apply to all LG TVs with the Alpha 9 Gen 3 chipset, including the GX or G10 OLED as well. And the thing I want to do in the first instance is to show you the firmware that has been installed on this LG 48-inch C10 or CX that I'm using for this demonstration. So I believe it is still running the most current public firmware of 03.11.25, you can see here. And just as a point of note, I have been reading many comments in my YouTube videos section about some of you experiencing stuttering, tearing, and many other similar artifacts in games from the Xbox Series X or let's say the RTX 30 series card. And I think, to find out the exact culprit, you have to at least make sure that your firmware is up to date. So make sure that you are running the latest public firmware, and that will at least rule out one factor that may be causing this tearing or stuttering artifact. And another important point to make sure is to use a good HDMI 2.1 cable. Now I know the Xbox Series X and the PS5 shipped with HDMI 2.1 cables inside the box, but they are only 2 meters long. And I think some of you may have been using cables that are longer, maybe 3 meters, maybe even 5 meters. And the thing is, you need to use a cable that is certified to pass 48 gigabits per second. Otherwise, you will be running into a lot of problems, blackouts, flickering, tearing, stuttering. You need to rule out that it is an HDMI cable problem. So here I'm using one of the world's first, if not the world's first, HDMI 2.1 cable that has been certified by the HDMI licensing administrator. The cable I'm using is from ZX. I think some of you may have heard of them before. I will be giving my thoughts on this cable in a future video, but I just want to let you know that before you do anything else, you need to at least make sure that you have the latest firmware on your TV and also have a good HDMI 2.1 cable. And I've shown in a previous video how much the cable matter to try and resolve the flickering or any stuttering issue from a Samsung TV. So let's get back to this LG CX or C10 then. What I'm going to do now is to open up the Pendulum app from NVIDIA, and I will try and demonstrate the stuttering problem at high frame rate. So you can see that it is currently running in HDR, and what we're going to do is to increase the slider to somewhere between 100 and 120. So if you can bear with me for a while. And then I'll increase the minimum slider to about, say, 97, the high 90s. And I'm recording using 60 frames per second, so hopefully you can see from your camera that there is indeed some stutter. And to make things easier for you to see, I'm going to pull up this test pattern again from the NVIDIA Pendulum app itself. And you can see some stuttering and speeding up and frame skipping, whatever you want to call it. It is not smooth, and it is not what G-Sync promises to be. So with G-Sync or any VRR, what you're supposed to get is a totally tear-free and stutter-free experience, because the frame rate of the display is being matched to the frame rate of the content. So with this in mind, what we're going to do is to install the new firmware. And I think, it is a one-way ticket for me, because, I don't work for LG, despite what some of you think. So I can't actually roll back the firmware on this TV to an earlier version. So I have to record all the findings and take as many measurements as possible before updating the firmware. And I'm going to do it now. And I'll see you shortly after the firmware has been updated. Welcome back. So I have installed the beta firmware and we're going to go into the user menu and see the version. And the version would be 03.21.03 and maybe the one that you will receive for your TV in terms of the public firmware may have a slightly different version depending on your region and also whether LG themselves decide to add further improvements. But what we're going to do now is to fire up the Pendulum app again, and then we are going to check whether the high frame rate stutter remains. So if I can pull up the FPS slider and we'll just go up to say the high 90s to just below 120, and it looks quite smooth to me. But what I'm going to do now is to fire up the test pattern, which is a scrolling bar, which is going to be easier for you to work out whether there's any stutter, and there doesn't appear to be any stuttering whatsoever. So I think this firmware will resolve many of the stuttering issues you are experiencing with high frame rate in VRR mode, let's say above 90 frames per second to 120 frames per second in Call of Duty. Some of you have been complaining about stuttering or random lines appearing, and I think that this beta firmware, this new one, will be the fix for you, and hopefully LG will roll it out soon. If you are interested in our other videos talking about LG OLEDs and also next-gen consoles, I've created a playlist here if you'd like to click on it, and I will see you in the next video.